On a snow-laden Christmas Eve in Chicago, Carter Flynn paused at the entrance of Rosewood Bistro, his broad shoulders dusted with powdery flakes, his breath fogging in the icy air. At 36, he should have been used to winter storms, but tonight the cold seemed to settle straight into his bones, into that quiet, aching place where grief lived. It had been 3 years since he had been on a date. 3 years since the night a Christmas Eve accident had taken his wife, Louisa, leaving him and their daughter suspended between memory and survival. He shouldn't have agreed to this blind date. He knew that. But that morning, when Bridget looked up at him with hopeful blue eyes and asked if he was really truly going to meet someone special, he couldn't bring himself to disappoint her. So now he stood here, snow melting on his fraying jacket, wondering whether he had the courage to step inside. Inside the warm, amber-lit restaurant sat a woman who seemed as out of place in his world as a diamond in a toolbox. Alexandra Bernice, 34, elegant, poised, and heartbreakingly composed, ran a fingertip along the rim of a wine glass she'd barely touched. Her posture was straight, her expression unreadable except for the flicker of impatience when she checked her watch. She had been talked into this by a well-meaning friend, persuaded that 3 years was long enough to keep mourning a future she never got to live. But sitting alone in a room lit by twinkle lights and surrounded by couples whispering over candle flames, she felt only dread pressing on her ribs. When Carter finally approached the table, he came with a nervous smile and a sincerity that felt too fragile for this polished place. Their small talk quickly frayed. His laughter came too quickly, his gestures too big, and her polite responses were as thin as glass. The evening felt doomed before it had a chance to breathe. And then everything changed. From behind a small decorative fir tree, a little voice whispered, "Daddy, she's the one." 7-year-old Bridget Flynn stepped into view, clutching her worn stuffed bear, Astrid, her wide blue eyes shining with certainty. Her golden hair framed a face far too wise for her age. Carter tried to usher her back toward the children's table, flustered, but Alexander's expression had already softened just slightly. Carter was a man built from quiet resilience. Kind eyes, strong hands roughened by years of repairs and odd jobs, a once brilliant engineer who had left his career because single parenthood demanded every piece of him. His life revolved around that little girl hiding behind the Christmas tree display. Everything he did, every repair job, every late night, was for Bridget. Alexander's world was a different orbit entirely. A senior marketing manager, impeccably polished, commanding in boardrooms, always in control. But beneath the tailored coats and fierce competence lived a woman who had learned loss the hard way. 10 years ago, she had lost her younger sister, Emma, in a sudden crash. And 3 years ago, almost the day, her fiancé confessed an affair with her best friend. She had canceled the wedding, locked her heart behind walls, and thrown herself into work so completely she no longer remembered what tenderness felt like. The moment Carter mentioned Louisa's love for winter, Alexander's hand drifted to her necklace, a delicate silver chain holding a tiny snowflake, the same snowflake her sister had treasured. The coincidence cracked something inside her, and she escaped to the restroom before the tears came. While she was gone, Bridget quietly slid into her seat. "She's sad like you, Daddy," the little girl said simply. Before Carter could respond, the lights flickered. Outside, snow was falling harder, thick sheets of white swallowing the city. Weather warnings trickled through the restaurant, and tension began to ripple among diners. When Alexander returned, she found Bridget seated at her table, tiny hands folded solemnly. "I like your necklace," Bridget said gently. "My mama had one like it. She's in heaven." Alexandra froze. Her breath caught. Then she lowered herself into the seat beside the child. "My little sister is in heaven, too," she whispered. She loved snowflakes. That fragile moment between strangers was interrupted by another power flicker, another shudder of wind against the windows. The storm outside grew fierce, whiteout conditions swallowing the street. The restaurant manager announced that roads were closing and travel was becoming dangerous. Carter immediately stood. "Bridget, we need to get home now." But buses had stopped. Trains were delayed. Walking was dangerous. Before they could decide what to do next, the unimaginable happened. Bridget, mesmerized by the swirling white world outside, slipped away from them and pushed through the front door. The cold hit her like a blow. Wind howled. Snow swallowed her tiny boots. Inside, Carter turned to take her hand and found nothing. Bridget? He spun, panic flooding him. Bridget! His shouts silenced the restaurant. Carter and Alexander bolted outside into the storm. Snow whipped their faces, stinging their eyes, stealing their breath. The wind screamed loud enough to drown their voices. They searched desperately. Behind cars, near the sidewalk, along the building, Carter's voice cracked with fear, the fear of losing the last piece of his heart. Then Alexander spotted something, a small pink shape huddled in the snow. There! Carter ran, half slipping, half sliding, falling to his knees beside his daughter. She was crying, her face red with cold, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. He wrapped her in his coat, holding her as though the world itself were trying to take her from him. Alexander arrived seconds later and draped her scarf around the child, pressing close to block the wind. Together, they shielded Bridget with their bodies until they could carry her inside. The restaurant erupted in relief. Blankets appeared, hot drinks, warm towels. Carter cradled Bridget, whispering comfort, his hands trembling. Alexander hovered nearby, her own fear still etched in her expression. Something between them shifted, quietly, undeniably, and for the first time all night, hope flickered. Alexander followed the little girl through the narrow hallway, every step echoing with a dread he hadn't felt in years. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender detergent, something comforting yet heartbreaking in the cold silence. A dim bulb flickered overhead as they reached a small bedroom whose door stood halfway open. The girl pushed it gently. Inside, Clara Evans lay motionless on the bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow like ink on paper. Her breathing was shallow, barely noticeable. Her lips were pale, and one arm dangled slightly off the mattress, as if she had been reaching for something before collapsing. Alexander felt the air leave his lungs. This wasn't the lively woman who hummed old songs while cleaning his office, who always refused an extra tip, who often talked about her daughter with quiet, endless pride. This was someone fighting for life. "Did you call anyone?" Alexander whispered. The girl shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. I didn't know who to call. My phone is broken. I tried to shake her. She didn't move. Alexander reacted instantly. "Sweetheart," he said in the softest voice he had ever managed, "step back. I'm going to help your mom." He rushed forward, tapping Clara's shoulder, calling her name. No response. Her pulse weak, too weak. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and called emergency services. "This is Alexander Reed. I need an ambulance now. Possible unconscious adult. Breathing unstable." His voice cracked despite his attempt to remain calm. When he hung up, he knelt beside the bed. The little girl climbed onto the mattress and held her mother's hand, whispering, "Mommy, please wake up. Please." Alexander's chest tightened painfully. "Hey," he said gently, "what's your name?" "Amy." "Amy," he murmured. "The doctors are coming. Your mom's going to get help very soon. I promise." Amy nodded but didn't look away from her mother. Alexander stood and scanned the room. He silently cursed himself. How had he never realized Clara was struggling like this? She came to work every day, smiling, composed, unwavering. He had never asked, never cared, to look deeper. He had assumed everything was fine. A knock rattled the door. Alexander rushed to open it, letting in 2 paramedics who moved quickly, checking vitals, coordinating efficiently. One of them looked up after a moment. She's severely dehydrated, and her blood sugar is dangerously low. Did she have any medical conditions? Alexander swallowed hard. "I don't know." The paramedic nodded. "We need to transport her immediately." Amy began sobbing when they lifted her mother onto the stretcher. Alexander scooped her into his arms without thinking. She clung to him like he was the only solid thing left in her world. They hurried down the stairs, snow still falling outside, covering the street like a white blanket. The ambulance's red lights pulsed against the flakes. Before they loaded Clara inside, The paramedic turned to him. Are you a relative? Alexander paused. No, I'm her employer. The paramedic hesitated. We'll need a guardian for the child. Amy tightened her grip on Alexander's shirt. He nodded. She's with me? The doors closed, and the ambulance pulled away, sirens slicing through the cold morning. Alexander stood in the snow with Amy in his arms, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like the falling flakes. This wasn't an employee problem anymore. It wasn't a routine morning. It wasn't something money could clean up. This was a life. 2 lives. Are we going to the hospital? Amy whispered. Alexander looked down at her. Her small face was red from crying, and her thin jacket didn't stand a chance against the freezing air. Yes, he said softly. But first, let's get you warm. He guided her into his car, turned on the heat, and wrapped his own coat around her. She looked so small in it, swallowed by softness and fear. As he drove, Alexander felt something shift inside him. For once, the man who always had answers had none. For once, the man who lived in control was shaken to his core. For once, he saw the fragile, invisible threads that connected people, threads he had ignored, threads he convinced himself he didn't need. But today, he needed them. And maybe they needed him too. The hospital came into view, glowing like a beacon in the snowy dawn. Alexander exhaled shakily. Don't worry, Amy, he murmured, as much to her as to himself. I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving your mom. Whatever happens, you're not alone anymore. The little girl reached for his hand. This time, Alexander held it tightly.